And now, coming to the stage, the K-State TED Talk series on diversity and diverse equitable classroom exposure. Speaker, Josiah Yan.
Thank you. Today's topic centers around one of the most crucial topics that we've ever discussed in classrooms throughout our time in the modern era. 200 years ago, the most, as we would have called in the time, civilized, but as we now call forward economic countries, believed they were practicing one of the most believed to be the most perfect practice for agriculture: the transatlantic slave trade. Slavery throughout its years has become known as one of the most devastating practices to human beings. Through its time, transporting thousands to millions of people is one of the most crucial events ever. The transatlantic slave trade on its own, transporting hundreds of thousands to the American people, and at the time would have been more under influence of countries in the Caribbean and South America as well. Countries in the Caribbean and countries in South America, such as Brazil, were also large contributors to the slave trade. In our current day and age, we consider these people to be enslaved individuals that were absolutely powerless, and at the time they were. Today, through their stories, they hold power. And that's the only thing that we can give them to honor their memories and their lives. Nothing can take away from the suffering and the death toll that was brought upon them by the transatlantic slave trade. In classrooms, we have individuals who are of African descent. These people live in a world where slavery isn't a part of their reality, but it was a part of their ancestors. And that's something that many people do not fully grasp, and they can't without education around it. In the classroom, we talk about the basic necessities of the slave trade, the basic functions of how it worked and why it occurred, but we rarely ever delve deeper into the people that are behind it. Europeans played a major, crucial role in bringing the slaves to the American continents at that point. However, individuals in power in Africa are also responsible for the slave trade. Slave trade had been happening amongst the African continent for years, many, many years, hundreds of years prior to the transatlantic slave trade. And it was horrible. It was a way of their life that did, in fact, harm others. At the time, many great powers came to be known on the African continent. Powers that we only rarely talk about in the current day and age, and we morely focus on the European influence in the transatlantic slave trade. However, there were many different tribes and kingdoms that played a crucial role in trapping other African tribe members and selling them to the Europeans. What we don't realize sometimes is that they still practiced slavery at the same time. They did not bring, and Europeans did not go over and capture every single slave that ended up being on the American continents. Rather, they traded or purchased these individuals from kingdoms and tribes on the African continent who already had possessed them. We do see examples of people being caught specifically for the purpose of slave trade for Europeans. However, that was not the main source of how these people were captured. One of the most famous kingdoms in recent era to be acknowledged for the slave trade, their involvement in the slave trade, both as people who were caught and people who caught, is the Dahomey people. The Dahomey kingdom is one of the most revered kingdoms of the 17 and 1600s. This specific kingdom went through a really, really radical history and found itself not only serving stories for one minority and individuals who originate from Africa, but also women. Recently, the movie Woman King came out, and with that movie came loads of people wondering how accurate it was. And while many people have gone on and tried to say that this movie showed no accurate depiction of the events that took place during the transatlantic slave trade, I will tell you that a fair amount of the raw information is actually quite accurate. King Gyezo, which is actually the name of the king during part of the Dahomey Kingdom's reign, did in fact exist. Additionally, the warriors that we see in Woman King are also quite real. These female warriors were nicknamed the Dahomey or African Amazons, depending on which European country did battle with them. And many people in the current day and age do prefer us to speak their original name that they gave themselves and that their people called them, which was Ahosi, which in that native language for the Dahomey meant king's wives, and the Mino, which means our mothers. Now, the reason why the Dahomey or African Amazons still is a name that is used in historical senses is because this was one of the few times in history we saw European powers come and give a name out of respect to the warriors they fought from other cultures. The Amazonian warriors in history were supposedly these incredible all-female fighting regiments in ancient Greece. Now, the reason why this is important is because this is what the European powers thought they were fighting against when they fought the Dahomey. These elite warriors, the Ahosi or Mino, defeated European powers multiple times throughout battle, including crucial turning points that ended up producing more time for the kingdom of Dahomey to relate to its power. Now, why is this important in the current day and age of education? Well, the simple state of the fact of the matter is that these people were not known about by middle schoolers or high schoolers until Woman King came out in most states and schools. We talk about it now because Woman King is out, but most of the information that's being referred to in Woman King is the misinformation that they produced, which in any movie production you're going to have things that are gone wrong. It's how you make entertainment. But these people did exist, and their fierce nature and brutality in battle is very true. Now, we reference this tribe in terms of for and being slaved because these people did trade individuals that they had used for slavery to Europeans in the slave trade. Additionally, however, they were preyed upon by bigger kingdoms, referenced in Woman King, but also in the primary text we have, and including their own texts that they kept, that they were actually captured themselves. Now, this is not trying to victim rule them, but what we talk about in a classroom setting is relatability. Individuals of African origin and women in the classroom constantly face battles of what we would consider token lessons. The Dahomey female warriors, the Ahosi or Mino, are such a prime example of only one time in history that we can specifically highlight to gather people's interests and how powerful women, and specifically women of color, were. But they're not the only reason. They're not the only people. During the Mexican Revolution, women were constantly used as fierce battle warriors. Even so much so that Star Wars and George Lucas used their hairstyle for Princess Leia to show a symbol of power and ferocity. We have documentation of different tribes through Asia and Oceania using women to be warriors and leaders. But their stories aren't told. And until media production put something on the map for the Dahomey, their story wasn't being told. Yes, in college classrooms for years we've had the exposure. But sometimes that's too late. Not everyone goes to college, not everyone needs to go to college. But understanding that you, and someone who looks like you, not only has a place in history, but made it, is extremely powerful. These Dahomey warriors survived generations, and even into the 1900s, were recorded for attempting assassinations on European powers that still held stead in their countries. We're not condoning assassinations, but that's how recently these specific people were taken off the map. And while that is tragic that we don't see the Dahomey warriors still to this day and their form and glory, we can look back. We have pictures of them. They were recorded in a time that we just didn't understand. If you came from a European country, you didn't understand why these females were fighting you. But the truth is because it was who they are. They weren't tokens. King Gezo is recorded to having almost replaced his entire personal guard with these warriors because of their capability to protect him. I have several friends that hadn't heard this story, and when they were told about it, being individuals who were African American, and several of them African American and women, were shocked. Yes, they had seen Woman King, but they had no comprehension of just how powerful these women actually were. Woman King portrays a single battle in which these women completely dominated a force from Africa, using similar weapons, having similar means. These women took down European troops, winning several battles against powerful nations, including France. Their place in history is not just a token. It's a chapter. Thank you.